When Isaac and Elizabeth Oakley lived in Putnam Valley from 1853 to 1904, their house looked out onto some of the better farmlands in Putnam Valley. Now, nearly 100 years after the Oakley's passing, Isaac and Elizabeth diaries survive. A treasured resource of the Putnam Valley Historical Society, these diaries provide us with a window into the past. This video is the first in a series on life in those times, the life illuminated by the Oakley Diaries. (1875), 24th April, life churned the first time. 8th May, took away my first pot of butter. Throughout the 1800s, New York State was known for its dairy products. Butter was a valued commodity. Butter making was a time-consuming, painstaking chore. It was usually a seasonal chore and always a woman's chore. Many farm women would have written entries similar to Elizabeth's, if only they had time to write. Few people today can remember the old-fashioned way of making butter. 50 years ago, Lucas Barger, a Putnam Valley native, reminisced.
The rich people of the cities think they eat the best food that can be, but they don't. Take butter, for instance. The butter was made for about 6 weeks from the time the new grass showed up in the spring. It's never been equaled anywhere.
Butter has been made for centuries. The process has remained basically the same. Changes that have occurred from the early 1800s onward have been due to the growing awareness of the importance of cleanliness. Modern methods of pasteurization ensure that the milk we drink is safe, free of disease, and packaged under sanitary conditions. It has always begun with a cow or a goat. The first milk out is thin. Milk toward the end of the milking is thicker. Some farmers would use only this choice milk for their market goods. The more frequently the cow is milked, the thinner the milk is. The morning milk is the best of the day. If the cow is pastured on strong-smelling grasses, though, the milk will smell like wild onions or garlic, and so will the butter. Dairying existed where general farming was unsuccessful. In the 1850s, a New York State survey interviewed dairy farmers who were proud to elaborate on their business practice. A Mr. E. Sherman of Orange County noted that his neighbor told him that in 1853 he made 248 pounds on an average for each cow. And from each cow he realized $76 exclusive of the meat. And he was said to be a man of standing and veracity. In the mid-1880s, the value of dairy products was more than 3 times that of wheat. Isaac's diary from January 1888 shows us that he spent $6.22 on groceries, while he sold 38 pounds of butter for $9.60. The next step in butter making is to pour the milk into large, shallow pans. The milk is left to stand until the cream rises to the top. This usually takes about 36 hours, but is faster in hot weather and slower in the chill of winter. Here we see the cream has risen. Milk separates into cream and skimmed milk. The cream makes butter and cheese. The skimmed milk makes yogurt and cottage cheese. Now it is time to skim the cream from the milk, which is easier said than done. Each farmer probably had his own method of doing this, but farm journals and county fairs were sources of new ideas. Mrs. E.M. Jones, a dairy judge at Chicago's Great Columbian Exposition of 1893, explained.
The best time to skim shallow pans is when the milk is just beginning to lopper or thicken in the bottom of the pan. A little experience will soon teach when this is the case. Then, with a spoon, loosen it all around the edge. Never, never do this with your fingers, as is the disgusting habit of some people. Tip it a little, and the whole thick sheet of cream, guided a little with your spoon, will slip off quick and clean, taking hardly any milk with it.
Mrs. Jones apparently knew that cleanliness was an important concern. Pasteurization, the heating of milk to kill bacteria, was not widely practiced until after 1912. At this point, the temperature of the cream is crucial. It generally must be between 56 to 62 degrees Fahrenheit. If it's too cold, the cream won't thicken. If it's too hot, the butter will spoil. In the Oakley's time, thermometers had been invented but weren't always needed, as Mr. Sherman from the New York State Survey asserts. The only thermometer we use is the forefinger of our dairy maid, and we find she can temper the milk full as well as those who use a real one. She's practiced 6 years in our family. The 1800s, a time of many new inventions and improvements on the old. Butter churns were produced in a wide variety. From the century's early dash churn to the more complex barrel churn. Some churns even had treadmills and were powered by a dog or a sheep. Churning the butter was a tedious chore. Women chanted to help make the work go faster, but it always took at least 30 minutes of steady, monotonous churning. The cream is churned so that the globules of butterfat suspended in the cream will bond together. This forms butter.
Come, butter, come. Peter's standing at the gate, waiting for his butter cake. Come, butter, come.
Hundreds of years ago, Middle Eastern peoples used to have horses to do their churning. How? Well, they'd fill leather bags with cream, then strap the bags onto the backs of the horses. At the end of the journey, they'd have butter. After about 20 minutes, you should see the cream separated into grain-sized pellets of butter and buttermilk. After the butter is formed into large-sized globules, it is removed from the churn with the clabber. The leftover buttermilk can be used for baking or fed to the pigs. The butter granules are normally rinsed several times with water until all traces of the buttermilk are gone. Next, you'd work the butter with wooden ladles, pressing them firmly together so that the butter globules will bind and any remaining buttermilk will be forced out. At this stage, salt is usually added because salt is a preservative. The Oakley Diaries make no mention of this step. Wealthy as the Oakleys were, they had no icebox. Invented in 1803, it didn't become popular for well over 100 years. Elizabeth probably had a spring house, a small stone or wood house with cold spring water flowing through it, where she was able to keep her butter fresh for months. The diary contains this entry. 1883, 16 March, sold 15 pounds of butter for $5.25, made last October. The butter would be packed into crocks or wooden tubs called firkins, made of seasoned white oak and capable of holding 100 pounds of butter airtight. On smaller farms, it could take days or even weeks to fill the tub, by which time the older butter might be rancid. As the last butter was added, the entire batch would be then worked together, distributing the spoiled butter but lowering the quality of the whole. Sometimes farmers packed their butter in smaller containers, as did the Oakleys. If the butter had to be stored for a long time, a linen or cotton cloth would be laid over the butter and covered with a layer of salt. Finally, the butter was ready for market. Farmers often traveled to market at night so their butter would not spoil in the hot sun. We know that Isaac Oakley sold his butter at various stores in the Peekskill area. Farmers who sold their butter in city markets offered pound units of butter with fancy imprints made with butter presses. This butter was high-priced, yet very popular. Few people today can remember the taste of the sweet butter made from the milk of the family cow. The Oakley Diaries can help us to imagine that we do remember that time, because it makes the past more real to us. It makes us feel her pride in that butter. (1882) June. Gave Reverend Shurter 4 pounds of butter. as a present. September 1870. Took 15 bushels of apples to cider mill. 26 September 1870. Got 2 40-gallon casks of cider from the mill. 17 October 1876. Got 50-gallon cider from mill. Had got 65 gallons before, making in all 115 out of 12 barrels of apples. So Isaac Oakley of Putnam Valley wrote in his diary, "In the late 1800s, apple production was a major industry for the farmers in New York State. In Manhattan, the New York apple market had been thriving since the 1840s, offering many upstate farmers a ready market for their apple products. 3 main apple products were sweet cider, hard cider, and vinegar. Each of these products further extended the life of the precious apple. Most farmers owned a cider press, but larger commercial cider mills were plentiful. Cider is made by crushing apples into pulp, then pressing the pulp to squeeze out all the juice. The wide 8-inch screws of this press would have been turned by a strong man or a horse pushing on a long pole inserted into a hole near the bottom of each screw. An 1867 map of Putnam Valley shows 3 commercial mills. The Rundle Mill, which gave Mill Street its name, operated until 1932. Vivian Vreeland Clark, granddaughter of Arthur A. Rundle, who was the last miller, remembers drinking cider from the round open catching tub which held the freshly pressed cider. She used a straw of rye. the material used in pressing the pulp. Cider was a popular drink in the 1800s and early 1900s. At that time, the temperance movement, which sought to outlaw alcohol, was widespread. But temperance advocates accepted cider, even though sweet cider naturally ferments into alcoholic hard cider. Isaac Oakley was an ardent temperance supporter, as this diary excerpt indicates, and he maintained a thriving business selling cider in New York City. Cider was the drink of choice. Sweet cider and hard cider, offered to family and friends at all celebrations and holidays. Some old-time varieties of apples favored for cider making were Rhode Island Greenings, Pippins, and Roxbury Russets, seen here. This small, yellowish-brown apple is rarely found now. Most modern farmers look for brighter, redder, bigger, and less tasty apples. Modern apple trees have also been bred to be smaller than old-fashioned apple trees for more efficient picking. The old-time trees sometimes reached over 30 feet. The best cider comes from a mixture of several types of apples, creating a pleasing blend of sweetness and acidity. Usually, 1 bushel of apples would produce 2 to 2.5 gallons of cider. But Lucas Barger, in Life on the Rocky Farm, states, there is 4 gallons of juice taken from 1 bushel of apples. Most small farmers in Putnam Valley owned a small hand-operated cider press similar to this barrel press. After the apples were gathered, they'd be washed and any spoiled parts cut out. Then the apples would be dropped into the top of the press into the funnel-like hopper. As the crank was turned, the teeth would mash the apples into a pulp called pomace. The pomace was collected in the barrel, which first had to be lined with cheesecloth to prevent the pomace or any of its precious juice from oozing out between the slats. In large commercial mills, the pomace was collected in a very large tub. Here the pomace is caught in cheesecloth. The cheesecloth is folded over the pomace before it can be pressed. Now a circular wooden board called a hat is placed on top of the pomace. In a commercial mill, the pomace is stacked alternately with straw for pressing. Now the hat is screwed down slowly but tightly to extract all the juice. This is a hard job. In some commercial mills, this is where horsepower was used. Finally, sweet cider. The pomace, pulpy and rather dry, would be given to the pigs. Sweet cider was a seasonal harvest time treat, savored but short-lived. Farmers extended the life of this apple product by turning it into hard cider. Hard cider is produced when the sugar in sweet cider ferments, producing alcohol. Generally, hard cider is about 6% alcohol. To make hard cider, sweet cider is put in a cellar of 45 to 50 degrees, no warmer, and in a day or less, fermentation would begin. If hard cider undergoes a second fermentation, vinegar is produced, further extending the life of the apple. Isaac Oakley, ever resourceful, notes in his diary, 30 September 1871, to Peekskill with the oxen. Took 170 gallons vinegar to William Russell. Oakley also produced wooden hoop poles, the rings around a barrel that hold the staves in place. He shipped 350 of them by steamboat in March 1867 to New York City, where they were used to make barrels. Oakley received empty barrels from the city, which he then cleaned, filled with cider or vinegar, and shipped back to New York City. Vinegar, hard cider, and sweet cider savored the beauty of the apple harvest 3 times over.